Good morning, everybody. I'm Marjorie Chorlins. I'm the Senior Vice President for Europe here at the Chamber. It is my great good fortune to welcome all of you and also dozens of people online, as I understand it, for this conversation this morning with the Executive Vice President and Commissioner for Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis. But first, I'd like to introduce the President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber, Suzanne Clark.
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this morning. And on behalf of the U.S. business community, welcome to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We are delighted to have our guest of honor with us this morning, as Marjorie just said. And we just had a quick meeting with the delegation and know that you have a big day ahead with the 5th Ministerial of the U.S.-EU Trade and Technology Council. So you giving us a sneak preview of your priorities and being with us this morning is a great privilege. I also want to welcome our colleagues from the EU delegation, European embassies, the Department of Commerce, USTR, and of course, our member companies. Earlier this month, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce hosted our premier annual event, State of American Business. And we talked to an audience of about 10,000 people about the reason the business community is optimistic. And we focused on the idea that underpins and enables that optimism, and that's free enterprise. Because for more than 100 years here at the U.S. Chamber, we have understood that free enterprise, free markets, and free trade have a proven track record as forces for good in the world. We know that global engagement is how we protect our national security, promote our values, protect our allies, and promote economic growth here and abroad. Our success in advancing our values and priorities, of course, depends on robust global partnerships. And America's strategic and commercial alliance with Europe has never been stronger or more important. We enjoy the world's largest commercial relationship. Two-way investment between the U.S. and Europe totals more than $7 trillion. Two-way trade is valued at $1.4 trillion annually, and 16 million jobs across the U.S. and Europe are directly tied to the relationship. Given the size and the value of this partnership and the complexity of this moment, it's more important than ever that we work together to make those ties even stronger. We need to enhance trade and investment on both sides of the Atlantic while avoiding new discriminatory measures that add cost and complexity and undermine certainty for business. We need to institute smart, balanced, nuanced regulations to keep the US and Europe on the cutting edge of emerging technologies like AI. And we need to avoid heavy-handed regulations that hamper innovation and competition. Working shoulder to shoulder to maximize the global competitiveness of our alliance will also put us in the best possible position to tackle shared challenges. One is China, where we need to be aligned to address national security threats, human rights abuses, and economic coercion, and to continue to stand strong against China's unfair trading practices, intellectual property theft, and digital protectionism. Another ongoing challenge is, of course, Russia's unprovoked war in Ukraine. Time and again, we have seen the fates of democracy and free enterprise are intertwined. Continued cooperation on Ukraine is critical in preserving the strength of the transatlantic relationship. A final key challenge that requires a robust transatlantic alliance is energy security. We need sound energy policies in both the US and EU that will allow us to continue and deepen our energy partnership. Global security depends on our ability to fuel our economies and our communities today while transitioning to a low-carbon future. We know we have to address climate resilience while powering economic growth, which can only be done by leveraging the private sector. So this is a particularly important moment in the transatlantic relationship. The world needs strong unified leadership in the US and the EU. And we're eager to see the US-EU Trade and Technology Council generate tangible commercial benefits. We hope today's fifth TTC Ministerial will demonstrate progress toward aligning on key issues. And that's only one of the reasons that we are honored to have with us today the European Commission Executive Vice President and Commissioner for Trade, Valdis Dombrovskis. He has been a strong and longtime advocate for even closer collaboration between the US and Europe. A little later today, he and Executive Vice President Vestager will be meeting with US Secretary of State Blinken, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, and US Trade Representative Catherine Tai. We're grateful with that busy schedule that you made time to be with us here this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Executive Vice President Dombrovskis.
Dear Suzanne, thank you very much for these kind words of introduction, and above all, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Ladies and gentlemen, the year ahead will be like no another. Around 4 billion people will go to the polls in 2024. Not all of these elections will be fair and free. But some will have major repercussions building on the profound geopolitical shifts of the past years. What sets 2024 apart is not just a sheer number of national elections involved, almost 1/3 of the globe. It is also striking that the US presidential elections coincides with elections in other major countries, including India, Mexico, and on our side of the pond in Europe. Against this backdrop, I would like to speak about three things today. First, I would like to start with a few geopolitical reflections of the world in 2024. Then I would zoom in on transatlantic relationship. And third, I will end with the role of the international rules-based order, notably the World Trade Organization. Ladies and gentlemen, 2024 will be decisive for world democracies, not least because of threats that autocracies and aggressive regimes pose to the democratic order. The risk of election manipulation by other parties is very real and dangerous, so we need to fight back in the global information war. That means investing real resources in this work, both at home and abroad. In Europe, it is now established fact that anti-democratic forces, including Russia, have been meddling in the internal politics of the EU and seeking to influence electoral outcomes. And the United States are also not immune to this kind of threat. It is much cheaper and easier for the Kremlin to engage an army of internet trolls to wreak information havoc than to engage a conventional army on the battlefield. But now Russia is attacking us on both fronts. Its illegal, unprovoked war against Ukraine illustrates the dangers that the democratic world faces again. For us in Europe, it is an existential threat. Russia's attack on democratic country challenges the international rules-based order built by Western democracies after the Second World War. For 70 years, we had been developing a multilateral system based on international law. This system is now challenged by Russia's brazen aggression. I come from Latvia, a Baltic country that was occupied by the Soviet Union for 50 years. The Soviet occupation brought devastation and poverty. But it could not eradicate our trust in democracy, the free economy, and the rule of law. We did not forget those values, which helped us to transform our country much faster once we regained independence. We became member of the European Union, NATO, and the Euro area. As President Zelensky said, there is one thing above all that motivates Ukraine's soldiers. It is the expectation that one day they and their children will live in a free and prosperous country. Helping Ukraine to defeat Russia is the only way to ensure long-lasting peace in Europe. First, this means giving them all the weapons they need. It is absolutely vital to maintain our support if we want David to continue standing up and ultimately win against Goliath. So far, the EU has supported Ukraine with nearly 85 billion euros. That's around $90 billion, of which $27 billion have been military assistance. The Baltic countries stand out as providing the most support when measured against their GDP. Soviet rule taught us that freedoms should be defended, included by military means. If Ukraine fails and Russia feels bolstered, it will try to attack other countries. And that would simply mean a much bigger war with NATO. To avoid this scenario, we must continue to provide Ukraine with financial and military support and to change the narrative from as long as it takes to as much as Ukraine needs for its victory. We also need to accept Ukraine into the EU and NATO. These steps will define the future of rules-based system or its collapse. Second, we need to hold Russia accountable. The International Criminal Court in The Hague has already taken the first step. We should maintain pressure on Russia. This means we need to continue to impose and enforce sanctions, including on companies that continue to export goods to equip the Russian military industry. We should also look at how we can use Russian assets to support Ukraine. This needs to be international effort. This is why I'm pleased by the G7's recent decision to keep Russia's sovereign assets in its jurisdictions immobilized until Russia pays for the damage it has caused to Ukraine. Europe and the United States must jointly lead in this key area, so let's continue. Meanwhile, today's geopolitical dangers unfortunately expand beyond the horrific war in Ukraine. The tragic events in the Middle East and the attacks by Houthi rebels in the Red Sea all bear witness to that. As the shockwaves of these events ripple across continents, they are causing a far-reaching realignment of international relations economically and geopolitically. There are many other shifts underway. China has grown into competitive and assertive power that challenges the current rules-based system. It is a major trading partner for both EU and the US, but we must learn to carefully manage the risks that come with this relationship. This brings me to the second point, the importance of transatlantic relation for steering a pathway through these complex global challenges. Former US President Jimmy Carter famously quoted this high school teacher as saying the following: we must adjust to the changing times and still hold to unchanging principles. And I couldn't agree more. And I would add, at the time of extraordinary global change, the world needs transatlantic leadership more than ever. It needs transatlantic leadership anchored in those deeply held, shared, and unchanging principles. The EU and US are partners that see eye to eye. Not only do we cherish the same core values such as freedom, human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, we also have a joint history of defending them in the international system that we have built together for their very protection. We are both economic heavyweights. Together we make up 42% of the global GDP. Trade across the Atlantic has been hitting one record after another. In 2022, our bilateral trade amounted to $1.6 trillion. That is $4 billion a day and 15% increase compared to pre-pandemic levels. Our supply chains are deeply intertwined. Investments on both sides of the Atlantic are worth more than 5 trillion euros, while free trade and investment opportunities have created millions of high-quality jobs. And our deep bond has always been the best formula for peace, stability, and prosperity around the world. The strategic goal of countries like Russia is to look for fissures in that bond. Ladies and gentlemen, the 2024 is also a year when our administration will reach the end of their respective mandates. By now we have shared more than 1,000 days working together. It has not always been easy. We both took office at challenging times when our transatlantic relationship was being tested. Since then, I believe we have overcome many obstacles. We reached an international agreement on business taxation. On the trade side, we worked effectively with the Biden team to find solutions to the trade spats we inherited. For example, we landed Airbus-Boeing dispute. And perhaps most importantly, we have created a strong positive momentum with the creation of EU-US Trade and Technology Council. The idea behind it is simple. Transatlantic cooperation has always mattered most at the biggest crossroads of history. Once again, we need to join forces to make sure that democracies write the rules for the 21st century. With the TTC, we want to do just that, to cooperate on trade, economic, and technology issues. As trading superpowers, we can influence the global conversation in these areas. The TTC has also proven critical to coordinating our trade-related sanctions against Russia. Later today, we plan to make progress across various important work streams. This will include the work on Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade to facilitate trade in clean tech and green goods. And we hope to make progress on conformity assessment and digital tools that simplify trade. There will be also a focus on creating strategic supply chains like semiconductors and solar. We are deepening cooperation on export controls, investment screening, and economic security at large. We have laid a solid foundation over the past 4 years, and we now need to build on it with commercially meaningful outcomes. But most importantly, this trusted platform should endure and continue its work beyond the mandate of our current administrations. At the same time, there are certain areas where the EU would have hoped for more tangible progress over the last years. The prime example is the steel sector and the US 232 tariffs. Global steel overcapacity has been a serious problem already for decades. It distorts the global level playing field, and it remains an obstacle on decarbonization of steel industry. We regret that we did not manage to reach an agreement in spite of very hard work and constructive proposals. Throughout the negotiations, we did not see a credible path from the US towards the elimination of 232 tariff rate quotas. This would have put to bed this Trump-era dispute once and for all. This is a missed opportunity for businesses on both sides of the Atlantic. The same goes for the negotiations on the critical minerals agreement. If concluded, it would address certain EU concerns over the Inflation Reduction Act's discriminatory aspects, and it would strengthen the EU-US supply chains in critical minerals, which we need for the green transition. The CMA could have served to promote high levels of sustainability and labor rights along the critical raw material value chains. So we would have liked greater flexibility from the US side, but we still hope to get this agreement over the line. Let me end with a few broader reflections on the global rules-based order. For our transatlantic relationship to thrive and exercise a maximum clout on the world stage, we need to cooperate with our partners across the globe. Global problems need global solutions, and this begins within multilateral institutions. Fixing the World Trade Organization is a crucial piece of this puzzle. There can be no doubt we need it revitalized, updated, and reformed. We also need to remember, in spite of all organizations' problems, 75% of the world trade still takes place on WTO terms. It is a most favored nation principle that has underpinned the resilience we have seen in trade throughout the dramatic global challenges of the past years. And let us consider the alternative. A fragmented trading system based on power relations can harm everybody and benefit no one, with the exception of perhaps of China. In Western countries, including the US, if we want to maintain a rules-based world order and balance China's influence in particular, there is no alternative to strengthening transatlantic leadership in this forum. This is why it's crucial for us to join together to advance much-needed reforms at the 13th WTO Ministerial Conference next month. And we need to make progress along 3 tracks in particular. First, we need to work together to fix the dispute settlement system. We know US criticism of the appellate body is consistent and bipartisan, and we hear you. This is why we are willing to work with the US to reform it. Second, we need to design a trade policy to meet the new global challenges. The 21st century is a digital century. E-commerce is a rapidly growing force in global trade. So we rely on the US support to give e-commerce negotiations further impetus at MC13 and also to extend the e-commerce moratorium. Third, trade rules need to finally catch up with the realities of 21st century. One prime example is a need for updated rules on both industrial and agricultural subsidies. We also need to conclude negotiations on fisheries subsidies as a priority. We know that there are of course, differences between the various communities, and we need to bridge them. So, ladies and gentlemen, 2024 will be a decisive year for our democracies. Hence, it's even more important that our governments lock in the progress we have achieved together up to this point. The world needs transatlantic leadership now more than ever, so let's continue to build on what we have achieved so far. Thank you so much.
Are we on? Yes. Oh, good. Now we are on. So I have the great good fortune now to continue our conversation this morning with the Executive Vice President. We talked, as Suzanne said, about a couple of important topics before we set foot in the room, and the Executive Vice President, I think, has elaborated on a number of important issues we'd like to dig in just a little bit more during the time we have remaining. Suzanne, excuse me, Suzanne Clark talked about the Chamber's commitment to free trade and free enterprise, and the importance of what we would consider to be purpose-built regulation that achieves important objectives without undermining growth and innovation and prosperity. How do you think we can continue to work together to promote these values and share a vision of free markets at a time when we see burgeoning protectionism, overzealous antitrust enforcement, heavy-handed regulation, and the overall tilt towards industrial policy?
Indeed, that's certainly a concern we share. So maybe a couple of reflections in this regard. First, the tendencies which we are observing towards protectionism in various countries risks fragmenting the global economic and trading system. And there are estimates that if this fragmentation were to happen, so the world trade focusing across certain geopolitical blocks, this would reduce the global GDP by some 5 to 7% of global economy, by some 5 to 7% of GDP. And 7% of GDP, it's a combined economic weight of Germany and France in the world economy, so it would amount like taking Germany's and France's economies of the map. So clearly, we see that it's a tangible economic damage which can be created through protectionism and fragmentation. That's why we need to resist this. And well, first and foremost, it obviously means protecting and strengthening, reforming the global multilateral trading system. So already was talking about the role WTO plays in this and the need of ensuring the well-functioning WTO and its reform. Also, we need to acknowledge that, okay, globally there is this policy shift from efficiency to resilience. This is something which is just happening. So from that point of view, it's important to find the right balance. We're also in Europe, we are discussing our economic security strategy. Just recently we came with a new proposals in this regard. It's going to be an important part of our discussions at the Trade and Technology Council today. But also it's important to ensure that also like economic security does not become pretext for protectionism. That means that we need to have a proper risk assessment. So what are the risks we want to address and address them in a targeted and a proportionate way. So that's the approach which we are following in our economic security strategy and in a sense try to promote internationally. So from that point of view, even our economic security strategy has three pillars. So promote, protect and partner. And also this partner pillar is equally important, that we need to partner with like-minded partners around the globe. And also in terms of economic security, economic resilience, diversified and resilient supply chains are actually the best answer. So again, diversification requires engagement with reliable partners across the board. So, but clear that this work requires constant attention, constant work, constant communication, and there the voice of the business is important, that you also as important stakeholders in this discussion and as the ones who actually do international trade are voicing your considerations, your concerns for policymakers to take into account.
I'm glad you mentioned stakeholder engagement. That's obviously something that we think is incredibly important, both in the context of the Trade and Technology Council, but more broadly on some of the larger topics that you discussed. I want to come back to the TTC in just a moment, but I want to pick up on your comments about economic security and the measures that Europe has laid out in the context of its new strategy. I mean, obviously, we talk about the need to coordinate our efforts on things like export controls and investment screening and sanctions when it comes to the anti-competitive practices of countries like China. How well do you think we're doing in remaining aligned in that regard? And do you think there's more we can be doing to align ourselves and also bring other allies to the table?
On this area, I think we are cooperating EU and US quite well, and clearly TTC has proven its value in this context. So on export controls, also when it was discussed in a context of sanctions against Russia, the cooperation which we have built within the TTC actually has helped us to coordinate it and advance the decisions effectively. And generally speaking, this cooperation in the area of economic security has been good. It's true, I already mentioned this question of partnering also with other partners. Well, we have certain formats like the trilateral format with Japan, but it's clear that we also need to engage on those topics with other like-minded partners, because it's clear that as a democratic world, we will be stronger if we will be acting together and if we will be coordinating our approaches.
And do you think that among the member states there is more of a convergence of views with respect to the challenges that China poses?
As you have probably also noticed from my speech, we do not see the questions on economic security and also military security, not only through China angle. I know it's more dominant here in US. We have imminent threat and menace at our doorstep, which is Russia, which we need to deal with. But I would say over the last years, indeed, there has been a broader convergence also among EU member states that we need to take those economic security matters more seriously. The world has become more fragmented, more conflictual, and as EU, we need to be able to function in this more fragmented and conflictual world. It concerns economic security. It is also concerning, obviously, the military security. So currently we are working a lot in the Europe to develop our also military industry, the production capacity of the military industry, because those hard security issues will be much prominent in coming years, if not decades.
Do you see this? Do you see that the upcoming elections, both at the parliament but also in some key member states, will how will those elections, I guess I'll ask, have an impact on the transatlantic relationship and our ability to respond to some of those challenges to economic and national security?
First of all, EU and US are strategic partners, so it's important that we continue this strategic partnership, and especially it's important on current geopolitical context. So I wouldn't expect any major shift in that direction. Even though there are certain angles which we need to watch. I was already mentioning the meddling of Russia in electoral processes and political processes in EU member states, which is by now, in a sense, established fact that it's has taken place and is likely taking place. So we need to defend our democracies also in the information war. But all in all, as I said, I would not expect any major shifts from this transatlantic cooperation, and more generally, the security issues will become more prominent and more dominant also in EU's agenda. For EU, it's not really natural. As you know, EU has been built as a peace project, so this military dimension basically has been absent in the EU, but current conditions actually require us building it up.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit, thank you for that. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about Europe's increased focus on its competitiveness and the increasing emphasis on industrial policy. I think you know well that the Chamber has expressed some concerns that in its drive to improve European competitiveness, EU institutions may be looking at measures that are either discriminatory in terms of their effect on American companies, or look to boost the competitiveness of European companies at the expense of other important trading partners. Can you talk a little bit about Europe's approach to its competitiveness strategy and how we might see a balancing, a greater balancing of carrots and sticks, as opposed to an over-heavy emphasis on the sticks?
On this question first on EU's economic competitiveness. Indeed, that's an area which is also featuring more prominently on EU's agenda in recent years. We have come forward with EU's competitiveness communication from the European Commission side. We are looking at concrete deliverables and so to say points which we need to address. So just to outline some of the directions of work and some of the things we think it's important to address for EU's competitiveness. One point is to look at the productivity growth in the EU, and the fact is that productivity growth in the EU has been lagging behind other major economies like US, like China, already for decades. So we need to look what's behind this slower productivity growth and how to address this productivity growth. Then there are some concrete competitiveness factors like energy prices in the EU are higher than in the US and also many other major economies. Once again, it's a competitive disadvantage, so we are working how to address this question of energy prices. We had to address in 2022 our dependence on Russian fossil fuel supplies, which we did. It came at a cost, but so the question of energy is certainly an issue. Population aging, availability of the skilled workforce, the workforce having the right skills for a green and digital economy, where we are heading, another important topic. Reducing the administrative burden, you touched upon this. So from the European Commission side, we now came with the initiative of reducing the reporting burden by 25% without undercutting underlying policy objectives. Also faster permitting procedures in member states, especially for projects related with a green transition. So just to show you number of areas. Then there's also obviously the question of financing, where you interestingly voiced concerns of certain EU legislation on the US businesses. Frankly, we have, as you're well aware, concerns about certain US legislation on EU businesses. And Inflation Reduction Act is a primary example because it contains many discriminatory provisions against European companies. It comes with a, so to say, generous subsidies to lure the companies and investment away from Europe. So we need to look how to deal with this situation, and indeed part of our response has been also to loosen our state aid rules to give more leeway to EU member states to subsidize their companies, in a sense to match US subsidies. I have never been a fan of this approach and always warning against subsidy races. But with the Inflation Reduction Act, we are where we are, and also we need as a EU to look what are our options. But I think this conversation also here shows that there is a scope for transatlantic conversation, especially in the context of green and digital transition, how we better do it together. And that's exactly the point of our transatlantic initiative on sustainable trade. And tomorrow we hope for, so to say, clear and concrete input from stakeholders on how we can do this together.
Well, we certainly are looking forward to tomorrow's stakeholder event on the Transatlantic Initiative on Sustainable Trade. I think it's a, excuse me, it's a perfect way, sorry, it's a perfect way to I think, launch this important dialogue. As you know, I think the Chamber has been encouraging both the US and EU to make more of an effort to engage stakeholders in both preparing and implementing the agenda of the TTC. And so we're glad to see that the TIST will launch, indeed, with a stakeholder event. I wonder, You talk about the TTC and the fact that we have seen some important developments, in particular on the technology T, if you will, in the TTC. But we've seen less progress with respect to the other T, the trade T. Obviously, we continue to have some important disputes between us that we are not making the progress toward resolving that we might hope. You referenced those in your opening remarks. How do we use the TTC to promote a more positive trade agenda going forward?
Indeed, that's something we had been, in a sense, intensively promoting and advocating from the EU side, and came with many concrete initiatives, also on trade facilitation side, what we can do in terms of conformity assessments, our mutual recognition agreements, what we can do in area of using electronic means in facilitating trade, what we can do in area of green public procurement, just to mention some examples. And from the EU side, we are keen to advance this work. I agree with you that there could have been more progress. And I hope that this transatlantic initiative on sustainable trade will provide us with certain new opening to advance this work. Because all in all, indeed, I share your assessment that there has been more progress on T, which stands from technologies, and T, which stands for trade. And from the EU side, we are willing to catch up.
Do you see prospects for the TTC or something like that platform continuing with new administrations on both sides of the Atlantic?
I certainly would expect so, because it's clear that this dialogue on all the trade and technology issues has proven very valuable, not only ministerial meetings, but also working groups which have been set up and work on different areas. We not always agree, and we not always come at concrete and far-reaching results we would want to have. But it also helps to understand better each other approaches, avoid certain misunderstandings, to deal with certain issues in early stages before they become a new dispute. So certainly it's a very valuable tool for transatlantic cooperation, and we see value, and I think that's exactly what's going to happen, that as a format it will continue also with the next administrations.
One of the highest points, I think, and you alluded to this in your remarks, of course, one of the important outcomes of the TTC has been close collaboration on measures to respond to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Can you talk a little bit about how you see the relationship between Ukraine and the EU evolving in the coming months now that the Council has agreed to the launch of accession talks with Ukraine? Do you see that process unfolding quickly? And how do you see prospects for securing the additional 50 billion euro facility that has been pending? You know well the difficulties we're having on this side, but I think there have been some challenges on the other side as well.
Yeah, well, on relations between EU and Ukraine, we had been coming up with this publicly many times, that we stand ready to support Ukraine and to continue to support it to ensure that Ukraine can defend itself and it can win this war against Russia. And we have been providing the support across different areas. Financially, I'll come to your specific questions on financial support, economically through unilateral trade liberalization measures vis-a-vis Ukraine, militarily, humanitarian assistance, support for Ukrainian refugees in the EU, and we have several million Ukrainian refugees in the EU. So all in all, I mentioned this figure in my speech. We have already provided support to Ukraine to the range of some $90 billion, and will continue this support. Specifically on financial support, we now have proposed 50 billion euros Ukraine facility for next 4 years, starting this year. And we're going to have extraordinary European summit on 1st of February, so in 2 days, to decide on this. And I hope that it is going to be decided, and it is going to be decided within the EU framework with the support of 27 member states, including Hungary. That was what was holding us back. If not, we have also already from European Commission made it public that in this case we would be prepared to move forward with the support of 26 EU member states. It's second best, it's procedurally more complicated, and so on and so forth. So we think it's important that this agreement is reached at the level of 27, but we stand ready also to move at 26 if Hungary is not really moving. So that's on financial support, and obviously what is important to cover also Ukraine's financing gap this year, that also US plays its role, so we hope for those discussions being unblocked also in US on your financial support package. Then on EU accession negotiations with Ukraine. Indeed, so the decision has been taken to launch accession negotiations with Ukraine. Well, that's in any case, it's not a fast process. This is a process which takes many years. In some instances, it has taken like decades. But I think the critical point here is not, in a sense, how many exact years it will take, but that it provides kind of a clarity and perspective of Ukraine on direction of travel and where they geopolitically belong, and they belong to the European family. So when you have a clear goal, well, you have a clear perspective, you can work towards this. And I think that's what's important, especially in current circumstances of Russia's aggression, that Ukraine has this clear perspective.
I'm going to open it up in case there are folks in the audience who might have questions. Oh my gosh, it doesn't surprise me in the least that there are questions. I'm going to start with a familiar phrase here near the front, and that's Luisa Santos from Business Europe. We've got a microphone coming your way. So we'll start with an easy question.
Thanks a lot. Good morning. Thanks. Good morning, Marjorie, Vice President. No, my question is a bit because we are among business and we have issued together with our colleagues here in the US Chamber a joint statement ahead of this TTC, as we've been doing also ahead of other TTCs. And my question would be, if you have a recommendation for the business community, because precisely we're discussing what will happen afterwards, what would that recommendation be to make sure that whatever we have achieved is a solid base to continue also for the future? So what you would expect for maybe TTC 6 from the business community to ensure that we have a solid base for the future? Thanks.
Yeah, well, thank you for this question. Indeed, so the TTC 6 is going to be the last TTC under current political cycle, and with our respective current administrations. So obviously it will be a good occasion to take stock where we are and what should be the way forward. But obviously then on the way forward, the incoming administrations will have to take a fresh look and decide how exactly they want to move it forward. So I do not have any very specific recommendations here, except of continuing this kind of advocacy work from the businesses of both sides of Atlantic, of importance of Trade and Technology Council, of importance of a strong EU-US cooperation in this series, and importance of making more progress also on a bilateral trade track.
Very good. We've got a question over here, and then Peter Bay, I'll come to you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Harbir Bhatia, and I am from Silicon Valley Central Chamber of Commerce. I happen to be in town for IF Summit, and I'm very glad to have this opportunity. Vice President, you keep referring to the importance of trade and support of Ukraine. I've worked a lot in Ukraine before taking on this role, and I can tell you that trying to make that bridge has been very difficult. One of the reasons is that everybody is afraid of investment due to lack of regulation, due to the climate in terms of the war, and of course, the concern of, let's not use that word, challenges in ensuring that the funds are used correctly. So I'd like to ask if EU wants to create this sense of family back with Ukraine, will they be playing a role in this? Because US has provided some of the most amount of funding to help Ukraine. However, ability to ensure those funds can be monitored, they can be put into the right places. Will EU play a role in that?
Yeah, well, first, well, I kind of feel compelled to come with a factual correction. Actually, it is EU which has provided most financial support to Ukraine. I already mentioned this figure of 90 billion euros so far and ongoing. Secretary Blinken just, I think yesterday, was referring to the figure of $75 billion from US side. Well, in any case, it's very sizable and important contribution, and I think we should not be at the race in a sense. We are providing more support. We are providing more support. I'm kind of emphasizing this point more now because I know that there are some political actors in US which are spreading the narrative. EU is not supporting Ukraine at all. It's all US which is paying, and so we need to debunk this narrative. That's why I'm insisting on those EU figures. But on your broader question, well, I think the word you were trying to avoid to say was corruption. So I'm working hands-on with Ukraine since 2014 on macro-financial assistance programs, and the conditionality of all our macro-financial assistance programs, including the very last ones already during the war, include the questions on fight against corruption. In a sense, together with the US, together with IMF, this program conditionality helped actually to set up the entire anti-corruption institutional framework in the Ukraine, and we see that Ukraine is making progress also in this area. And obviously, I was mentioning the Ukraine facility of 50 billion euros. It comes in a sense with obviously further expectations in terms of reforms and work in the area of anti-corruption. And also it comes with a strong audit and control systems. So obviously when we are committing very substantial funds now to Ukraine, we want to see that those funds are properly used and do not end up in one way or another misused. So, and there, this is also an important topic of conversations in the multi-donor coordination platform, which is coordinating our support to Ukraine. So audit and control is obviously a very serious part of this. You touched upon other questions now in a context of war. Obviously, one important topic is a question of war insurance. And so we're trying to see a way how to provide businesses which would consider investing in Ukraine, also in these very difficult circumstances, with certain war insurance cover, which comes at a reasonable cost. And there is a pilot project in this regard by the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development. There are some other initiatives underway. Because it's clear both to sustain Ukrainian economy right now and for its reconstruction, the engagement of private sector will be key, and we need to have right conditions for that.
I wonder if I could ask one follow-up question, and then I'm going to come to you. You talked in your remarks also about the European conversation regarding the use of frozen Russian assets. Do you anticipate that a decision will be taken soon on the use of the assets, or maybe the profits from the assets, or something like that, in order to provide additional support to Ukraine? That's obviously a topic that's under discussion here as well.
Yeah, indeed. This discussion is very much ongoing in the EU, and certain decisions have already been taken. So European Commission has come with a proposal first on the use of profits or revenue generated by immobilized Russian assets. First, providing legal clarity that this revenue does not belong to Russia. And second, tasking relevant financial institutions, central securities depositories, to put it aside in a separate account. And flagging that the next step would be assigning this revenue to the EU budget for the support of Ukraine. Okay, on this first two steps, legal certainty and separate account, political agreement was reached just, well, yesterday or a few days ago, so that's a step forward. This second step, assigning this money to the EU budget, will require a separate proposal from European Commission and European External Action Service or High Representative. So that's on revenues. And you know that Belgium already has taxed those external revenues and used this funding to support Ukraine. So there's some work already ongoing in this regard, because bulk of this money is in Euroclear, which is in Belgium. Then, second question, G7 has already clearly stated, and I mentioned this in my speech, that Russia's immobilized assets, including central bank assets, should stay immobilized as long as Russia has not paid reparations to Ukraine for damages it has created. So it's already provided clarity that this money will not return to Russia just like that. They will need to pay reparations, and if they will not pay reparations, obviously the question will come on the use of those Russian assets. And actually this work has now already started in G7 at the US initiative. And currently there are working groups looking at also different legal aspects, what it will imply, how it can be legally defended. So this work is ongoing, and I think there is a principle in international laws that aggressor has to pay for the damage it has created, and this work needs to advance in line with this principle.
Thank you. Peter Bay-Kierkegaard.
Well, thank you. Peter Kierkegaard from the Confederation of Danish Industry. I wanted to ask about conformity assessment and what we can expect there. And it gives me the opportunity to highlight a study that we've just released, or will release very shortly, that we've done together with some European colleagues on the benefits of doing a mutual recognition agreement on conformity assessment within machineries and electrical equipment. It will increase trade between the EU and US by $25 billion, and it will decrease our imports from China. So it will lead to a de-risking from China. So I think there are a lot of good reasons why we should do a mutual recognition agreement within this area. What's stopping us?
On conformity assessment, first we already have a mutual recognition agreement, so it's more a question of extending its scope. From EU side, we are willing to advance in this area. One reason why this proves difficult that we have quite different legal structures how this conformity assessment is done in EU and US, and that poses certain challenges for mutual recognition. But I would say if there is a will, there is a way. We can find a way forward. Actually, in some very targeted areas, we already have expanded the scope on some radio equipment and some specific things. That is part of now our transatlantic initiative of sustainable trade. One of the areas where we suggest to focus is exactly as a conformity assessment and extending the scope of mutual recognition agreement in now green technologies, so technologies which help support green transition. So what would be important that also in tomorrow's stakeholder event, this question features prominently from business side, and if you have concrete studies to show in this regard, certainly something we would be willing to look at with great interest and see how we can take it on board and how we can advance this work.
Executive Vice President, we're coming up to the end of our time here in just a moment or two, but I want to ask you, sort of practically speaking, in a perfect world, what would you hope to accomplish in terms of the transatlantic relationship between now and the end of the mandate? In a perfect world. And then in the real world.
Okay, on the real world, I think I already spoken enough to say more or less what is our level of expectations. Well, in a perfect world, sky is the limit. One can wish for very things. We know there were times when we were negotiating free trade agreement between EU and US, TTIP. But okay, in a perfect world, one could come back to this and then finalize it. In the real world, I'm afraid it's not going to happen. In any case, not anytime soon. So, from that point of view, let's stick with the real world and see how much we can make out of it.
That's a very deft answer. Well, look, you've been extraordinarily generous with your time. We are so appreciative of your commitment to the transatlantic relationship and your commitment to promoting rules-based international order. We, as you know well, have had our concerns about the direction of our own government when it comes to trade liberalization. And so we appreciate very much the work that you are doing. I think for us, the challenge is how do we balance that focus on free markets with effective measures to promote competitiveness and also sustain our partnership in response to some of the global challenges we have. We are very, very grateful for your leadership and your efforts in this regard. And I hope that this is, certainly it's not the beginning, but I certainly hope not the conclusion of our conversation with you. So please join me in thanking the Executive Vice President for joining us this morning.